Good morning. It is so lovely to see some familiar faces I've not seen in a very long time. So sending big love and to meet all of you new people, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I'm presenting a paper today with, she's not here, but it's a paper that Zoe and I are developing. So that's Dr. Zoe's onto on the side. I'm talking to you a bit about that. I'm based at King's College London. I'm doing medical humanities. I teach medical humanities in the med school there, but by background and by love is in applied practice. And today I'm based in Victoria at the moment, so I'm speaking from the territories of the Lekwungen peoples and to be alongside the Sepsen and Songhees people and the Wasanich people, and feel very grateful and privileged to live and play here in this beautiful part of the world. And thinking about how we make that relationship to the land and acknowledging the land is very much a big part of what Zoe and I are thinking about in our paper. So our paper thinks about that consideration and that power of noticing the quotidian, the everyday, and then valuing voices from the edges. And we ask what can be learned from motherhood, self-care practices, and advocacy from women engaging in quiet activism. When we say women, we're going to talk about all those who identify as such. And just as when we use the term mother or talk about motherhood, we do not assume that all women we work alongside wish to be a mother or were able to be mothers, but rather the impact motherhood has had on our professional lives. Voilà. So Zoe and I met in Manchester in 2005, both embarking on our MAs in applied theatre with some very snazzy hair colours, both foreigners, both very enthusiastic about theatre. Studying and running theatre projects together during our masters and then our PhDs, we have held each other in solidarity and kindness through family crises, illnesses, family deaths, job interviews, managing careers, pregnancy complications and loss, and now as working mothers and academia. And you can just see a little snapshot of our families. There's Rue sitting on Zoe's grandmother's lap in Greece, as Rue and the gorgeous baby Ruby having cuddles with my husband Steve, Dave up there juggling Rue, which is the only way to hold a 9-year-old child is upside down. These major life events, motherhood in our late 30s and 40s, stand out, but it's really the small moments that have shaped our friendship and our practice. Zoe gently mocking me in the library because all of her pencils had ended up in my hair. Me teasing Zoe for her one misjudged word choice in a workshop delivered to older men experiencing homelessness in Manchester, and us with our accents getting everything wrong. Planning prison-based projects at 2 o'clock in the morning to be delivered at 9 a.m. the next day, both being too foreign to get into the local prison in Manchester. And then receiving flowers, books, cards, rum, baked goods from each other whenever hugs were not geographically possible. And I really feel being so far away from Zoe, we were in a different time zone for the first time ever, and it's been quite interesting how we've maintained that friendship and solidarity. The individuals in the communities we work with are often women living with HIV or in recovery from addiction. They're often confined to the margins. They're often described as vulnerable. But what intrigues us the most is that almost forgotten dynamic, where of the dynamics of the lives lived in these spaces. And within this work, we've learned to pay attention to the often overlooked occurrences, those seemingly slivers of light, the conversations that happen away from the main workshop spaces, that personal information that's casually shared, and those gestures like an unexpected hug or a hand on your shoulder, which when noticed have a collective potential, what I've called an aperture of possibility. But this potential is only noticed if we realize and draw attention to these happenings. And by paying attention to these glimmers, these insights, these knowledges, when we witness them, we can then also consider them. They're not planned for, but in our noticing and paying attention, we can attune that and start to look better. And this is true for us. The calling attention to our multiple roles as mothers working in applied practice and as university or college lecturers in a damaging higher education environment in the UK. And it's been very interesting watching this difference here in Canada and different different challenges, but that navigation of that and the messiness of navigating this terrain. We both wish to also acknowledge that we are extremely privileged. We have jobs, we have gorgeous and generous solidarity and support from wonderful colleagues who are friends, but it's been really difficult at times also to be heard. We've come to realize that by taking stock of the juggle of hospitalized kids, school refusing kids, or COVID quarantine, that we share this space on the edge and that sideline conversations and gestures are worthy of a huge attention. And so this pause to reflect on the seemingly mundane has reinformed our understanding of the life juggle of our co-researchers' experiences. Our attention and awareness has been heightened, and noticing and valuing these occurrences is a form of quiet activism. So to begin, I consider what happens when we look and we notice those overlooked occurrences in the practice of applied theatre. For us, for both of us, paying attention to these glimmers has made us realize that there are indeed apertures of possibility. And we think there are two parts to an aperture of possibility. The first is the noticing of what's happening, off center stage, often in the margins, the stuff that's happening on the edges. And the second part is about paying attention to these happening and to reflect on their potential significance, to draw attention. So I've written a book about this. It's a shameless plug. It's called Applied Theatre and Sexual Health Communication. And really what I'm doing here is asking attention to be paid to small moments. There's some things whose meanings are difficult to capture, but when held and seen together, offer insights as to what might be occurring. And so through my practice with the HIV charity Positively UK, I have led workshops with their women's group since 2016. They're an extraordinary charity, Pos UK. They're wonderful. Started in 1987 by a woman called Sheila, who was outraged that there was no support for women living with HIV. So she starts at home and starts off as Positively Women. We did a project called Positively Past, Positively Present, which looked at podcasts, taking stories and hearing stories, not taking stories, capturing stories, knowledges that we would otherwise lose. So since 2016, we worked together. In our first project, at its close, we played the gift game, which you will have all played at some form, as we all went around in a circle and gave the person next to us a metaphorical gift. And the woman standing next to me gave me this beautiful series of metaphorical gifts for my baby boy to be, and she guessed the sex right. But it was only a game. But on reflection, what the group and what that one woman gave me was an invitation to be part of the group as a person, as a mother to be, and personal connections were made. 8 months later, at an annual HIV event, whilst I was still on maternity leave, I met some of the women again who immediately wanted to see pictures of my son, Rue, and wanted to know when we were next doing the drama. And very much they were like, no, you are part of our lives. And these are tiny moments that could be just missed as just being nice, but actually are an example of an aperture of possibility. On reflection, I could see that I'd been invited in to their community as a friend, as an HIV ally, an activist. And there's a network here that has begun to be formed that 10 years later, we're able to do different projects. So in my current project with Positively UK, we're looking at holding spaces in which current representations of what it means to live with HIV are problematized. And we always make work with in collaboration, in discussion, but also by placing the women who live well with HIV at the center of the work. From decision-making to implementation, we work and collaborate and facilitate alongside. And our practice offers the space to consider what happens when multiple everyday elements of a woman's lived experience are considered within a dedicated workshop space. And here I use the concept of quiet activism as a means of drawing attention to the smaller, more subtle acts, which at first might not appear significant. And the brilliant geographer, Laura Pottinger, I think it's Pottinger, sorry, I made it French, describes quiet activism as small, everyday embodied acts, often of making and creating, that can either be implicitly or explicitly political in nature. And speaking from our position as mothers of young children, we're very much aware of that effort, of that in-your-face activism, of the demands it requires in terms of money, time, effort, social acceptance, and celebration. For individuals living with HIV, it's not always possible to go out and be part of those big public protests, those beautiful ACT UP style protests, which are extraordinary, are not accessible. You know, Stigma, status, asylum status, jobs, societal views all impinge on individuals' ways of life, and it's not safe at times to act up so publicly. And for those who are not out with the HIV diagnosis, or their being is a threat to others, or who have caring or mothering obligations, it's not always possible. And other forms of protest and exploration are needed. And this, for us, we think is quiet activism. And again, here, we think apertures of possibility as a lens is really useful to kind of draw attention to those moments of quiet activism. That noticing invites a reflection on the often ephemeral activities that allow for different types of insights to be observed. And this practice by nature is gentle, kind, and takes time. Quiet activism is a means of reclaiming space. It's a taking up of space and impregnating, great word, particular spaces with women's voices, her stories, and experiences, in order to create a form of palimpsest, a marking in those spaces, bodies, and memories, which will continue to grow and spread and multiply. Cottager comes back and she says, quietness, stillness, and rootedness are not merely negative oppositions of mobile, audibly and visibly demonstrative forms of protest, but count here as active embodied stances, capable in their own right of preserving desired ways of living. For us, it's about creating opportunities for more livable worlds in which women living with HIV are not reduced to their status, but rather seen as multiple and whole, as rebels, as is the case of our most recent projects, which was Rebel by Default, gorgeous project. And thinking about Rebel by Default briefly, is really about that opportunity to come together and to recognize also that stillness and quietness is also more than enough. In this most recent project, we were able to hold a space in such a way that a trans woman who was attending her very first Positively UK session managed to come, navigate a very complicated university map to find the room. Kings, if you've not been, let me know when you want to come. It is a higgledy-piggledy campus. And they found their way and felt safe enough to be held and to sit and sew and then share her experiences. And then really thinking about what happened in those quiet, small moments. And for us, these moments of quiet activism, when looked at collectively, form in my mind something like a fungus network, what Suzanne Simard terms a mycorrhizal, I can never pronounce it, mycorrhizal network. And she talks about this beautiful book called Finding the Mother Tree, recounts her life as a forester and scientist in the forests of BC. And she shares her thesis that forests are social and connected in nature, and that elder trees communicate and share knowledge through this mycorrhizal network, fungus network. Simard calls these elders mother trees and describes how they're able to discern which seedlings are their own kin. The old trees nurture the young ones and provide them with food and water, just as we do our own children. And this quote for me, this last one, is the one that really stands for me. She says, when mother trees, those majestic hubs at the center of forest communication, protection, and sentience die, they pass their wisdom on to their kin, generation after generation, sharing the knowledge of what helps and harms, who is friend or foe, and how to adapt and thrive in an ever-changing landscape. And we see this network happening within the organisation Positively UK with the film we've just co-produced with Positively UK about Sheila, the fabulous woman who co-founded the organisation. She was a complicated, rebellious and disobedient woman. She contracts HIV through intravenous drug use, and that is a very problematic positionality for a lot of women. They are not seen as victims, but rather there's someone that brought them on. But that's a whole other conversation. So when Sheila and other women started Positively Women in 1987, there was nothing to support women living with HIV. In that act, she began to build a world, and she is that mother tree, that individual who sparked the revolution who, through a series of connections and networks, coordinated those growing mycorrhizal fungal networks, and in doing so sustains the other members of that forest. And when we premiered the film last International Women's Day to a room full of women who had been part of Positively UK Women for many years, and it just went, one woman started going, if it wasn't for Sheila, it wouldn't have been for me. And another person piped up going, if it wasn't for the woman who's just spoke, I wouldn't be here. And we just saw this beautiful network of support that had just happened. And they're tiny moments, but the shivers are still here. And as Zoe and I continue to exchange and think about what this means for our practice as Zoe works with women in recovery. She's just published a brilliant book called Performing Recovery, Addiction, Vulnerability, and the Ethics of Representation. Strongly recommend. But for us, when we look at our practice, we can see that our practice has resulted in a building of that entangled fungal network. And by paying a close attention to these entangling networks in both our practice, we can see how small moments and gestures begin to connect. Each action, each moment gradually attaches itself to another network, and slowly a self-sustaining and supporting underground is created with luminous and tiny connections reaching out to connect, thrive, and survive. In his recent book, Artists Remake the World, a Contemporary Art Manifesto, the philosopher Vid Simonetti highlights the potential of the arts not just to influence political action, but to serve as a world-building entity in and of itself. Simonetti asserts that art has the power to contribute to the making and unmaking of worlds, to shape the very fabric of how we perceive and engage with our reality. And this argument is relevant to the themes we looked at this morning. And we would argue that the practices of noticing, apertures of possibility, and quiet activism can make a fundamental role in the making and unmaking of our world.